Okay, so sir, my question is quite straightforward. Sir, there are a large number of people my age who might have great ideas for social entrepreneurship projects, but don't have the necessary resources or capital to fund said projects. So what would be your advice for such people in terms of innovative sources of funding or say crowdsourcing, etc.?
You know, I think I've heard this question many times that the biggest limitation for most people with a great idea is lack of funding. And my first advice, because I practiced what I preached, was you cut your coat according to your cloths. Okay, and you can scale it up to that level because you want to start here. But if you want to seed it, you cut your coat according to your cloth and start with whatever way you can. And I think that is the best advice that I can give at this point in time, because from that will mushroom. If you can't get the attention of everyone, then start small and you'll get the attention. Because if you're in the right place, the right time, and you're moving in the right manner, you will necessarily get that break as you go forward. But you'll have to work at it from a very different perspective. And second, if you're looking at anything in the high impact segment, it really does not mean, as I said, that it cannot be for not for profit. There is a general perception that when you look in the social sector, you feel if you're making too much in terms of profitability, you're not necessarily doing a great impact. Absolutely untrue. Because what you're then going to do is not think scale. And in India, the only way you're going to solve problems is by thinking scale. Sorry, yeah. The mic's already gone the other way.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I would like to ask you a question, and that is, if you could change one thing for the underprivileged, like if you could help them in one way, what would that be and why?
You know, it's a strange question because I think over the last 3 years, when we started off on our social foundation, and which, by the way, is called Swades, not Swades, after our movie that we made called Swades, because at that time it became a Swades moment where we really wanted actually young people from all over India and from overseas to come and work in the villages that we were working into. And both of us looked at each other and said, that sounds like the Swades moment where Shah Rukh Khan comes into the village, and that's why we called it that. But I think when I spent an incredible amount of time for the last 2-3 years, and I think the single word answer is a mixture of empathy, trust, and self-respect. Because what I've actually found, and what's the biggest challenge for what I would call almost 600 million people that are underprivileged just in our country in many forms, is their lack of self-respect and their lack of self-esteem. They don't really need charity. What they do need is for us to work with them, for them to feel that they're in control of their own destiny. Because the day they can do that, they're in command, they can look at their family in the face, and they can move forward with their lives. And the only way we can work with them, outside of giving them a few privileges, is for them to feel that they can earn their own keep and their own livelihood. But at the end of it, it's self-respect and empathy.
Sir. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question. Actually, it's been the first time I've been to India in my life. I've been here for the last few days. And trying to understand a bit more about the country, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is, considering that we are in a model United Nations, what do you think is the impact of media and of cultural production itself and the vision of India about itself within the international community and the vision of the international community regarding India?
Okay, but I'd almost take that as 4 questions, so I'll try and break that up in the best way I can. There are 2 aspects here. 25 years ago, we had only one single broadcasting channel and a very stereotyped approach to motion pictures. And if you look at that, therefore, it became a responsible element where if you heard it on television, for a lot of people still in India, if you hear it spoken down to you, that's the word. If you haven't had that great sense of education and that great sense of curiosity, chances are when something is said to you, you believe it. And I think that is the biggest responsibility today of media in any form, large screen, small screen, and mini screen, that we still hold a level of responsibility that when we're communicating, 50% of our audience will actually take that as the gospel truth. And I think that's the onerous part of media. And I think to that extent, we've done a fair job. It's more balanced than in most places, and I think we've done a fair job. But yes, it has a very, very high impact, whether you're talking down or you're talking straight. I think from an international perspective, I don't think necessarily there's a benchmark that we need to look at it from a global perspective. I think there's a misnomer necessarily, because when you're communicating, I think we have an incredible, unique culture here. I think this is one of the few countries in the world still where international content or international penetration of anything in terms of communication has not really penetrated. For two reasons. One, a very diverse culture. And second, a very strong local grammar and a very strong local sense of being able to communicate in an industry that's grown. So I think that's the way best I can answer your question. I'm not sure if I fully addressed your point.
So, with such a high pop here.
Can you just raise your...
Here, this side.
Yeah, okay.
This corner.
There are too many people raising their
Towards your
hands.
left.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so with such a high population growth in India, would you take it as an advantage or a liability for you to create jobs and to, make people come out of poverty and employ them?
Well, I don't think our rise of population is as alarming as it was 10 or 20 years back. Our total level of population is necessarily something that is already there. I don't think India's answer over the next 20 years is going to be that much of job creation, unfortunately. We're going to have 160 to 170 million people coming out over the next decade looking for a job. And I don't think we're going to have 170 million jobs for them. Most of your core sectors are actually degrowing. A fair amount of automation is taking place, and technology is replacing that. And therefore, the answer is going to be self-livelihood opportunities. The answer is going to be necessarily entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and creating opportunities for oneself. I think that is going to be something that everyone needs to wisen up to, be mature about that thought process and build on it. And if you look at that more as an opportunity rather than a challenge, I think India will be a different place. I'm going with the mic.
Hi, sir.
Yeah.
My dad and my mom always ask me to look up to you and be something like you. But I want them to understand that I want to go into literature, and I look up to you and ask you how to frame it.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think in today's generation, you just have to say it. I don't think necessarily past that thought process. My daughter says, I don't think I want to get married. I don't think there's a discussion that takes place after that. But to sort of more specifically, I think parents are there always, and I think there's a misnomer that you need to really convince them. And you'll know that when you become a parent in the next 10 years. But I think parents are there most to guide and to see to it that they have been able to usher in an era where you feel they've asked all the best questions for you. But at the end of the day, they also know in their hearts of heart that it's really going to be what you are. So the more passionate you are, and the more clear you are, and the more decisive you are, I think those will be the support functions for them to feel they can take a few steps back, because what choice do they have? And for the right reason, not for the wrong reason. Yeah? So you're going to try that tonight, or?
So?
Yeah.
So, to your right, I think.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel the process of digitization has impacted the Indian film industry? How do you feel it's impacted the whole point of storytelling towards the Indian population as it's growing?
I don't think it has yet, to be honest. I think, digitization today is still being used as a distribution platform or more disseminating something. I don't think it's right now the origin or the creative process yet. I think in most cases, there is a misnomer that, because it's digital and because you've got YouTube, from that point of view, you need to originate content. 95% of the content on YouTube is aggregated. It's not originally created. And that can change over a certain period of time. But I don't think India yet has seen any impact of origination or creation from the digital media. It's much more a distribution media.
Sir?
Sir,
Go ahead.
good evening, sir.
Somebody's going to tell me when my time is up.
Sir, how would you define entrepreneurship in the best possible way?
I think I have to sit down for 1 hour with you on that because it's not a simple answer. But I think if I was to say, you need to feel that very strongly. It's going to be very lonely at the top because sometimes it could be just you. At the same time, you need to feel very emotionally charged that you want to do this day in and day out. I also would advise a lot of people who are looking at this, don't try entrepreneurship. Because I think a lot of times I've said, let me try this for 1 or 2 years, because it's not like X or Y. If you want to do it, you're only going to succeed if you stay the course. Anyway, the chances of failures, which are momentary because they move away and that becomes a learning lesson and then you move to the next one. But unless you're willing to actually stay the course, chances are you shouldn't turn and be an entrepreneur.